Miami is booming, but who's really shaping that growth? And who gets left behind? The Beacon Council calls itself the engine of economic development in Miami-Dade. Today, I'm sitting with its CEO, Rodrick Miller, to talk about the deals, the risk, and the vision behind the headlines. Because the real question is, what kind of Miami are we building? Let's find out together. Rodrick, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so happy to have you here at the intersection.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Of course, of course. So we're going to start off with just get a little warmed up, right? Because you're a very interesting person. I did my research and I found out some things. So I hear that, first and foremost, you're into salsa. Tell me about that a little bit. How did that come about?
You know, I've always just enjoyed, so I am a musician. I grew up, my father was a bishop in a church. So I grew up playing piano and organ church, and I got into music and learned a lot of different instruments. But there was always something about the rhythm and the piano and just the kind of the flavor of salsa that always attracted me. So as I got older, I said, you know what, I want to learn to dance. You know, so I'm not quite a king of salsa or a prince, but maybe a duke.
A duke. We'll take it. We'll take it. Well, we have something in common. My father is a bishop too. He since passed, but same thing. Grew up in that background. So music and has always been a very big influence in that upbringing. What would you say would be your leadership style, rhythm-wise? Like, what type of leader are you?
Yeah, I mean, as you think about leadership, there's different types of leaders. Leaders for different moments. Leaders, and most leaders recognize that leadership isn't a static thing. So there's this idea that you need to be different leaders to meet the moment that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
At the core of my leadership style, it's really about collaboration.
Okay.
One of the things that I've learned is that doing a lot and doing it on your own, but fighting headwinds, you really don't get that far.
Right.
And so the more that you can build alliances and strategic partnerships with other organizations that are aligned and figure out and a lot of times we focus on the things that divide us rather than the things that bring us together. So I'm a big believer in finding the things that bring groups together, that bring communities together, and figuring out how do you work on those things that you agree on.
Right, which is so important to accomplish anything, right? And you all have set out to accomplish a lot with the Beacon Council. So for the person who doesn't know and might think that the Beacon Council is another acronym for something in Miami, let us know, what do you all do? What does economic development look like day to day?
Yeah, so economic development day in and day out. So the Beacon Council, we've been around 40 years. And if you think about when we were founded in 1985, it was a very different Miami. It was a Miami that was grappling with big issues in terms of drugs, in terms of perception. And I believe our founders, they really wanted to figure out, how do we grow out of the challenges that we're in? How do we grow an economy that is robust with opportunity and prosperity? And looking back over the last 40 years, the Beacon Council has been able to be a part of bringing more than 160,000 jobs to Miami, more than $8 billion in private investment. Mm-hmm. And the question is, how did we do that? And how were we a part of that? Well, we worked very closely with the assets of our markets. We work closely with the universities, with the port and the airport. We work closely with major businesses and nonprofits to be able to define a very clear story. So what's the story of Miami? Why is it that $1 invested in Miami will yield more than $1 invested anywhere else? Mm-hmm. That's the fundamental question that we try to promote and we try to answer. And we try to bring together the tools and sources to facilitate the transactions that are needed to grow a robust economy. So I think about our work in two major buckets. One area is, how do you drive transactions? So day in and day out, how are you bringing in more deals in the right industries at the right wages so that everybody in Miami has options for where they want to go and how they want to grow economically? And then the other side of it is how do you fundamentally shift the value proposition so that whether the Beacon Council is involved in the project or not, the market's just a better market. So if you look at the market a year from now, it should be better because of the work that we've done. And that's stuff like housing, affordable, how do we play in the space of affordable housing and thought leadership? How do we think about transit? These big things that are really essential to our long-term future and our long-term prosperity.
So when it comes down to Miami, right, we're such a diverse city. And you had a number of experiences. You lived in a lot of places, right? Tell us a little bit about where you've lived, right?
Yeah, so I'm a military brat as well. My father was also in the military. So between kindergarten and graduating from high school, I lived in 17 different communities. And one of the places where I live that I often say, you know, I give a lot of the credit for me being in this career was in Bad Kreuznach, West Germany. I was there in '89 when the wall came down.
Mm.
And I remember being a little boy and looking at the people coming from Eastern Europe and the little cars and kind of the struggle that they had. And I think that was one time where it was consciously registered that there are different levels of opportunity. And those economic opportunities have a lot to do with where you're born, what you look like, et cetera. And the question was, what do you do about this? And then I lived in El Paso, Texas, on the border of Mexico, so I saw poverty in that context. And then I lived in South Carolina, which is where I call home, you know, and I saw poverty in the rural context. So all of that work, I said there has to be a better way. And over the
Right.
course of my career, I've been able to work in different communities and figure out, you know, how do you bring economic prosperity? The last 20 years, I've worked. Before I was here, I was in Puerto Rico. After the storm in Puerto Rico, we led the recovery, economic recovery through an organization called Invest Puerto Rico. I was the CEO there. Prior to that, I was the CEO of the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, and we led the rebuilding of Detroit and the economy of Detroit during the bankruptcy. And then prior to that, I was the CEO of the New Orleans Business Alliance. So about 5 years after Hurricane Katrina, my organization was set up to bring economic opportunity to that. And so the trend I think you will see, and there were other communities that I've been in prior to that, but the trend I think you will see is that I've been attracted to communities that are in transition, right? Communities that are undergoing major decisions about their future, right? And that the decisions that they're making in that moment can perhaps shape the next 10, 15, 20 years, if not more. And to be a part of communities in those moments when they're making those kind of decisions, and often in cases after having experienced tremendous turmoil, is an incredible honor. So I love what I do, but the lens that I bring is very much a global lens, having been informed by living in places around the world and around the country.
Right. And that's why I intentionally, I guess, asked that question, is because what you're doing with the Beacon Council requires, I think, a level of expertise and knowledge, but a level of diversity in thought and nature, because Miami is just that. We're almost like a melting pot of different cultures and experiences. And so a one size fit all doesn't really work, right? And so what do you think your background and your experiences that you've had, how has it now influenced your decision making as the CEO of the Beacon Council?
So Miami is a very special place. And I mentioned some of the places where I've done this work before. And every place that I've done this work has said this, and it's been true in every place, but it's a little more true in Miami. Every place I've worked has said, yeah, but we're not like any other place you've ever been. And in every case that was true, but I think the Miami formula is a little bit different. What's different about the Miami formula?
Right.
More than half of the population here was born outside of the United States. That is at the core of our competitive advantage, is that we have, you know, we can have $1 million right in this room. I can pass it to you. We can pass it to all the people around this room. What have we done? Absolutely nothing. We passed $1 million around the room. The value of Miami is that Miami has global connectivity to markets that are on different cycles, right? And those ties are not superficial. Those ties are familial. And then those ties are reinforced by assets such as the port and the airport, which are two of the busiest in the country, and by our universities and by our international companies. And so Miami's value proposition is that it has people that can think like anyone anywhere in the world. Miami's value proposition is that it's still the best place in the world and in the United States to experience the American dream. When you talk about the idea of an honest day's pay for an honest day's work, or that idea of agency and being able to chart your own path, that's what Miami's about. And from my background, I think what I bring is an understanding of people. Right now, we talk about economies, we talk about businesses, we talk about these things, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to people. Businesses are made up of people, governments are made up of people, and if people don't have agency, then what good is a community? And so when I look at what I bring, it's having lived in Mexico and in Puerto Rico and in Spain and in different parts of the rural South and in the North and out West, understanding that we all want the same thing. Everybody wants better for their children than they've had for themselves.
Right.
Everybody wants dignity and self-respect. And people want an opportunity People want opportunities that allow them to grow and to thrive. And they don't want to be pigeonholed. They want the agency to be able to say, I like that opportunity or the other. If we're doing our job well on a very emotional level and on a very personal level, people have agency, and companies want to come here because they have the agencies to build the type of companies that they want. And what we built here in Florida and in South Florida is very special, because what I found is it's not a political thing. It's not a race thing. Uh, Everybody comes together behind the idea that a good job, is something we all want to support.
Right.
And I think that's something that makes us very special. And having lived other places, I can really value and appreciate that element of what Miami has to offer.
Now, touching on, you mentioned a little bit about employers and businesses coming to Miami, right? Miami can be seen sometimes as a gateway. But sometimes gateways seem like it could be a revolving door too, right? Like you may come, you may go. What do you believe make, or why businesses should stay in Miami, should put roots here to put up shop and say, like, we're going to do business here in Miami? What makes us unique from that standpoint?
So, I've talked a lot about the human element, but I've not really talked a lot about the business element. So I will rest there for just a moment. One of the things that I think is really interesting about Miami is that Miami is growing up. And I often tell the story of how my kid beat me in a race, and I was the only one that was surprised because I was a middle-aged man and he was a strapping young lad, and everybody else was like, "Of course he beat you in a race." And I was like, "Why would that ever happen?" Well, Miami's that strapping young lad. And what we found is that this community, of course, is about 130 years old. And when you look at the other markets that we've competed with, or that we're competing with now, they're much older. The New Yorks, the Chicagos, the San Franciscos. They're much more established in terms of not only what their sector and their strength opportunities are, but also in how they do business, which means that there's less ability in many cases for new companies to enter or for new players to participate. What's nice about Miami is Miami's at that point where it's still learning its own strength. It's still learning its own speed. It's still learning its own capabilities. I often say, what is it that an 18-year-old can't do? An 18-year-old can do anything because they're 18. They just got to figure out what they want to do and be focused about it. Miami's in that place. And so our value proposition is that companies that come here realize that they're in a low tax environment that's high value. They're in a market with high connectivity to Latin America, high connectivity to North America, high connectivity to Europe, and even Africa and the Caribbean. So they get that connectivity.
Right.
Companies that come here, they get access to talent. The most important driver of investment decisions is access to people who are smart, who are hardworking, and who want to contribute. And Miami has that in droves. But because of the types of universities that we have, our universities are young. our flagship university, just celebrated 100 years old. FIU, which is quickly rising in the ranks as a national public university, is only about 50 years old. Miami-Dade College is the largest college in the country with over 120,000 students. And so when you look at our institutions have a different kind of muscle than the Harvards and the Yales. What does our institution have? It has hunger. It wants to be ambitious. So when companies come here, these companies sometimes have gone to these more established markets and been rejected. But what they find in Miami is that, if you want to work hard, we'll roll up our sleeves and work hard with you. And you can't put a price tag on that.
That is so good. I find often that that little nugget is overlooked. That sometimes we think, even in the standpoint of accolades or whatnot, we may look at these things, but sometimes it's just about grit and getting it done. Like, and if you're a hard worker and if you can commit to that alone, it's like success is bound to follow. Success, though, you mentioned in the past that traffic, for example, is a sign of success, right? That something must be working. I don't know about all the residents that I sit in council meetings with, right? If they would agree with that, because it feels like nobody wants more traffic. And as Miami is growing and booming, and we're thinking about infrastructure, we're thinking about housing, things like traffic is one of them that kind of sticks out of making people not want to experience more growth. So what are your thoughts on that in the terms of, we want to be this city that rival with international cities, as we do, but at the same time, there's some things that come along with that. So what do you say to the public from that standpoint?
So I say that people have a right to demand the best in them. and their community. But you can't just demand the best. You have to be willing to be a partner in helping the community get there. So there's not so we compete with New York, for example.
Mm-hmm.
We have housing affordability issues. They have housing affordability issues. But when you look at their transit system, you can live an hour and a half away from New York, and there's still plenty of options to get back and forth for work. So for us, part of this, and this is a cultural shift, we should be investing in the infrastructure that will make us best in class in the world as a growing city, because that is part of what happens in growing communities is that traffic is worse. We've also got incredible challenges in terms of infrastructure, not
Right.
just roads and highways and public transit, but we've got many parts of the county are still on septic, and so I think there's an incredible opportunity for Miami to be a test bed for solutions and from an infrastructure perspective. We need to be the place that's solving these challenges that tropical communities all across the globe are facing, be able to export that know-how because that's
Mm-hmm.
an economic opportunity. But if we do it well, it should make our lives more livable as well. So yes, traffic comes, but if we're making the smart decisions, traffic doesn't have to be the problem long term because there are solutions to make the traffic less. There are solutions to address housing. So for example, when we think about affordable housing,
Mm-hmm.
one of the challenge, which is a huge challenge. I mean, I've heard stories of doctors making $1 million a year and saying, you know what, I'm not going to come to Miami because that million goes a lot further somewhere else. I think as we think about those kinds of things, how do we have employment hubs and employment corridors outside of the places that people always think about?
Right.
Because some of the places that have the more affordable places to live don't have employment centers. So these strategies and these challenges are real, but you'd rather have these challenges. The challenges of growth
Mm.
are always better than the challenges of shrinkage or the challenges of poverty. And I think that's and unfortunately, there's not a whole lot in between.
That's a really good point. I almost want to do a little mic drop moment because it's the truth. Like I guess I never even thought about that side of things. Is that we could be dealing with other problems, right? And so the challenges, like you said, of growth is what you just have to embrace when you're dealing with a city that is growing and booming. But there is another reality, I would say, of Miami or any Miami-Dade County in general, when it comes down to not all parts are made equal. So how do you ensure that these resources and opportunities are being, as much as possible, equally distributed amongst the various neighborhoods and communities within the greater span of Miami?
So I'm embarrassed to say it, I knew very little about Miami before I came here. I have family in Fort Lauderdale, and I always thought they lived in Miami. And I've been here a little over 2 years. I've not seen them yet because there's so much going on in Miami, I rarely make it to Fort Lauderdale. And I say that to say this. Many times the conversation pits one community against another in terms of opportunity. Miami's economy and Miami's market geographically is large enough, and in terms of the makeup, it's large enough to where there are distinct opportunities in distinct communities.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of our strategy has been, what are the opportunities from a geographic perspective? So for example, we've got a lot of things in logistics, and logistics jobs are good quality jobs, good middle wage jobs, that people like and are worthwhile. Well, a lot of those, of course, are tied to the port and airport, and a lot of those are in Doral. Or as we go after companies, we think about those places are places that have a lot of capacity. As we look at manufacturing, we look at Miami Gardens.
Mm-hmm.
We look at Homestead as places where you have manufacturing capacity. Of course, we know about the MSC project, which is a major, corporate headquarters now in Overtown. And of course, we've got all the finance stuff that's happening in Brickell. And so part of the way that we bring opportunity to different communities is being very tailored on our industry sectors that we're going after, and
Mm-hmm.
figuring out what places have the infrastructure from a people perspective and from a real estate perspective and from an infrastructure perspective to support those jobs. The other part of it is, we have a goal that we set around targeted urban areas.
Mm-hmm.
And targeted urban areas, of course, those that were here in 1981 know about the riots, the McDuffie riots, and kind of the challenges that came out of that. Well, Beacon Council has as part of its strategy that a percentage of our projects we're aiming to get those in targeted urban areas, which are low and moderate income areas, and they tend to be predominantly immigrant and African American, because we know that those areas have lower income. Now, there are social arguments that are made every day, social justice arguments every day that are made for investing in these neighborhoods and doing that work. And I think those arguments are legitimate, but that's not the argument that I would make. The argument that I make, or that we make at the Beacon Council, is an economic argument. That every person who is not performing at their optimum capacity as it relates to being an entrepreneur, as it relates to being an employer, as it relates to being an employee or an investor in this market, everyone that's not performing at their optimum capacity represents a loss, right? Represents a loss in productivity and profitability and opportunity in our market. And so a part of our job is, how do we ensure that the on-ramps to participation as an investor, as an employee, as an employer are robust and clear. And so we think about our work in terms of ensuring that information is widely distributed, that we've got clear business cases across the sectors that we want, and that there's access to tools. And some of those things that are things that we provide directly at the Beacon Council, but a lot of it is our ability to connect individuals and companies to partners who provide those services.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you said earlier in terms of collaboration, right? Like, you can't really accomplish anything without the ability to work together. And it's like this web that, you know, intertwines and intersects together, which make us achieve the ultimate goal, right? And so just to wrap up, because I don't want to hold you up too long. I know you're a busy guy. But I want to know, from your perspective and your leadership style, as you mentioned earlier, like, what's your North Star, right? I feel like in roles like this, where you have to please so many people, or try to attempt to please so many people, it can be, the word maybe not divisive, but you can be pulled in multiple directions. So what would you say is your North Star that keeps you rooted and grounded in the work that you do?
That's a great question. Part of this work is recognizing that you do have many bosses, right? Economic development, I often say, after education, it's probably the most disrespected profession, because everybody's had a job or has worked in the company, so everybody feels like they can build the economy. So you do have the public sector. You have the public sector leadership that that you're responsible to, because you're taking public funding, and we take public funding. So you've got all of that elected leadership. You've got the private industry, because you're really trying to create the environment for private industry to continue to invest, and they want to work with. And then, of course, you've got the residents of Miami-Dade County. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if the work we do doesn't support the residents, then what good is it? And so the North Star for us is clarity, and clarity about impact. How do we define impact? In the simplest of terms, it's jobs, private investment, and capital investment, and wages. So ultimately, we want more jobs year over year, better wages year over year, and more investment year over year. And I will share with you something that we haven't even released publicly yet.
An exclusive. Look at us.
An exclusive. This is the highest year of capital investment that we've ever had in the history of the Beacon Council. And we'll be announcing it shortly. But we helped bring over $1 billion in private investment commitments to Miami just this year. And so we want to make sure that we continue to focus on those things, and that we build an economy that's sustainable. Correct. In other words, the economy acts in a way where it continues to be self-perpetuating over time and healthy. We want to build an economy where there's robust economic opportunity, where it doesn't matter where you look, what you look like, or where you live, that you can fully participate. And we want to build an economy that, on the face of it, is better. It's competitive. Right.
Well, first, congratulations, because that is a huge feat. And just to be clear, are you the youngest CEO in the Beacon Council's history, or?
I don't know that, but I would. Yes, my team is saying yes.
Okay. Well, I think that is something that's huge, right? To be able to have accomplished that. And it also speaks, I think, to the idea of trusting younger voices.
Absolutely.
In my own experience of being an attorney, I recall many times where people have questioned me or my capabilities because of my age. But being at a firm who didn't care about that and put me in opportunities and situations, I was telling you earlier how I feel like since I've been practicing, it's been this experience of baptism by fire, of immediately being put in face to do these opportunities, but knowing that I can do it despite the age, right? Despite the years of experience. And I think with you, it's really interesting to see how your background, your experiences and traveling allowed you to experience so much and then be able to make such a huge impact. So I think it's something to highlight and acknowledge.
Thank you so
and
much.
so I'm happy that you shared that with us. And I just want to even just use this as a moment for businesses, employers, companies to just be willing and open to new, fresh ideas.
I think that's so important. I mean, think part of it is, and I say this to young folks all the time. First thing is be unafraid. No risk, no reward. The second thing is come prepared.
Yeah.
When I was hired as the CEO in New Orleans, I was 32 years old.
Wow.
You don't get those opportunities at 32 unless you're ready. And the way you're ready is that you're a student of your craft.
Mm-hmm.
If it's economic development, and we're talking economic development, there's not anyone that's going to know more about it than me in the room. And that's not me being arrogant. It's because I've worked hard to learn and study this craft and how things work. And I think part of the challenge of a little bit of influencer culture is that sometimes we allow people to be an inch deep and very flashy and not substantive. But young people, and I think there's a lot of young people that bring substance, but they have to know that the expectation is not the same. It's higher and it's not fair. Tough. The other part of it is I always respect my elders. I think that's very important.
Yeah.
That's just the culture I come from. And I think when you respect people and then you bring the preparation alongside that, that really goes very far. The companies that are winning are learning that it takes a multi-generational workforce actually to be successful. As young as I am, I know that the generation that's coming up now thinks about the world very differently than I do. And so if I can, have some of those people in my corner, it'll make me a better CEO.
Absolutely. See, I was about to wrap a little earlier, but I'm glad I didn't because I think we got some really good gems because that honestly, I hope that whoever listens to that and hears it, it might even feel as they are, that imposter syndrome might creep in, or you might feel like you're not enough. If it's about preparation and you know what you know and you do your hard work, it is yours and it's achievable.
One last thing I will say on the young person's front, and you heard it here at the intersection first, one of the things that we're excited about is we're relaunching something called the Young Leaders Council, where we want to bring the up-and-coming stars of business and industry and of civic leadership in Miami together to really talk about the issues most pressing, but also to engage them in this work. It's important that as there are a lot of senior leaders that are starting to retire and move on, that the next generation is not only in line, but that they're contributing in a way that's meaningful and impactful today. And our organization doesn't just want to be the organization of the boomers, it wants to be the organization of everybody.
Absolutely. We love it. Inclusivity all day, okay?
That's great.
So thank you so much, Rodrick, for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And thank you all for tuning in. You are tuned into The Intersection. I really do hope that you enjoyed this conversation. I know I did. And we'll see you next time at the next intersection. Miami's future isn't just about cranes on the skyline. It's about choices. Who benefits, who belongs, and what story we're writing for the next generation. So I'll leave you with this. When you think about the Miami of tomorrow, is it the one we're building today? Or is there still work to do? I'll see you at the next intersection.